of getting it on the ballot and everything. I mean, that's the law that was laid out. They followed it. So the next thing was the vote of the people to make that a constitutional amendment. And it passed. It actually passed to define marriage as being between one man and one woman. One of the big issues there is education. If it's not defined as between one man and one woman, then you can teach when they're in second, third, fourth grade in public schools that marriage is between whatever. So, but if you say it's between a man and a woman, then it has to be that you can't. That's the only way that you could teach it. Okay, so getting to this key of how we're passing this on in our society. So the California votes in favor of the people have voted to say we want this to be how marriage is understood in our state. Everybody good on that?
Okay,
but the story goes on. So then let's see. But what happens then is some people in the state appeal that to a judge, and one judge overturned the vote of California and said that is not. So basically they said it's unconstitutional to change the Constitution, to add something to the Constitution. But of course, that's the whole point of the Constitution, is whatever the people decide they want to have. So anyway, it's still going on. It'll end up in the Supreme Court, no doubt. Okay, this whole issue of can a state do this? Can a state decide what will be? The issue is also very big right now in Indiana. Okay, this is defining and understanding what marriage is up for debate, and probably will be something that we will get involved in at some point, depending. So this is on the night of when the judge overturned California's people, what they voted to change their constitution to. Okay, it's a CNN episode. It's a couple minutes long. So raises up some good points. I want you to pay attention to the language that's used, because I think a lot of this comes down to language oftentimes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, do you know what states allow? Do all states? I'm confused. Do all states allow same-sex marriage?
No states. Massachusetts does. I'm sorry. Yeah. Defense of Marriage Act right now in our federal government, which Obama just said that we're not going to, he wants the Justice Department to not enforce, but that is that if Indiana does not have to recognize any other state's marriages that are not between a man and a woman.
So I would have to.
But yeah, Massachusetts, I don't know exactly which states. I know Massachusetts, I'm pretty sure, allows marriage to be between people of the same sex, but I don't think there are currently any other states. There may be.
Vermont was flirting. No, what? Flirting with it for a while.
Okay.
Like
Again, only 24 hours in a day for me to look up all this stuff before class, but anyway. Yeah. So let's watch this.
Us to be part of this.
You're looking there at a rally tonight in California, people celebrating after a federal court judge strikes down California's Proposition 8 ban on same-sex marriage. It is certainly not over. If you need any additional proof, consider this. One of our next guests tonight represents a group called Freedom to Marry. The other heads up the National Organization for Marriage, similar sounding names, totally different conceptions of what marriage ought to be. Evan Wilson with Freedom to Marry joins us now, and Maggie Gallagher of the National Organization for Marriage. Appreciate both of you coming on. Mr. Wilson, where does the battle go from here as far as you're concerned?
Well, this was a very important step on the road to victory, but we have a long way to go. There are many twists in the road for this case.
Federal appeals is the next step? Federal appeals
That's
court?
right. This case will certainly be appealed, and it will go to the Ninth Circuit Federal Appellate Court in California. And meanwhile, it's important that the rest of us who believe in fairness make the same case for the freedom to marry in the court of public opinion that the lawyers made in the court of law.
But if this is going to be solved in courts, why does public opinion matter?
Because courts don't operate in a vacuum. Judges listen to what's being said, they hear what's being said, they watch what's being said, and they also look at public opinion. They look at the way in which the nation's understanding of who gay people are, of why marriage matters, stereotypes that used to seem real but now we know aren't. Judges pay attention to all of that, and that is part of the climate that surrounds the courts. And you hear it from the other side in their constant efforts to demonize and undermine the courts. We need to stand up for that.
Ms. Gallagher, this is probably going to go to the Supreme Court. Given the conservative nature of the court right now, are you confident that they would not, that they will uphold Proposition 8?
I'm optimistic. I mean, this isn't the first federal judge to strike down a marriage amendment. It happened in Nebraska in 2005. The Eighth Circuit immediately rejected the idea that there's a right to gay marriage in our Constitution, which doesn't exist. And we think the reason, this case was pushed by two straight guys with big egos, you just heard from them, against the wishes of the gay legal establishment. I think they fear what we anticipate, that there are not 5 votes to import into our federal Constitution the idea that to make a marriage you need a husband and wife is somehow bigotry akin to objections to interracial
Mr. Wilson,
marriage.
do you agree with that? The Supreme Court may not uphold it?
Well, we're going to have to see what the Supreme Court does, and there are many twists ahead. One of the things we can do to help the Supreme Court get there is to have the abundant evidence that we see from places like Massachusetts, Vermont, Iowa, Canada, South Africa, that ending marriage discrimination helps families and hurts no one. The more people have a reality on which to judge this, instead of scary right-wing rhetoric and fear-mongering, the more people move in support of the
Ms.
freedom of
Gallagher's
marriage.
point, she was saying that the court said that there's a right to gay marriage. The court wasn't saying that there's a right to gay marriage. They were saying that everybody has a right to marry, that is a fundamental right.
That's exactly right. My organization, excuse me, my organization is called...
That's the judge's point of view, so I just want to get clarification on the judge's point of view from Mr. Wilson.
Thank you. My organization is called Freedom to Marry. It's not called gay marriage. It's not called mandatory marriage. It's not called you have to do what somebody else wants marriage. It's about the rights we all share as American to make a personal choice of a partner in life and have that commitment in life respected under the law.
Ms. Gallagher, it was interesting because in the court case, what the side in support of Proposition 8 against same-sex marriage was arguing was that marriage is about procreation. But the judge pointed out that there's many marriages that aren't for procreation, and that, in fact, the Supreme Court has numerous times said that marriage is about much more than that it's about liberty, it's about freedom.
7 million Californians believed that we had a core civil right to organize, to donate, to vote for marriage. One judge in federal judge in San Francisco has stripped us of that core civil right. And he has done so on the grounds that he believes science has disproved the idea that children need a mother and father. I said 5 years ago, this judge has proved the case for gay marriage is ultimately rooted in a rejection of common sense and core ideas about the natural family, including the idea that children need a mother and father.
None of that, though, was actually proved in the court of law. I mean, your side had the opportunity to present witnesses, and the witness they produced ended up arguing the opposite side.
This biased judge made that conclusion, but I will tell you the majority of courts and the majority of Americans have rejected the idea that same-sex marriage is a civil right. And I think in the end we will win this, both in the court of law and the court. Why do I don't know why he's biased, but the reason I think he's biased is he telegraphed from the beginning in a variety of ways that he wanted to preside over a historic trial. I think the most blatant example was his attempt to skirt federal rules that prevent the televising of trials over the objection of one side in this case, and the Supreme Court had to slap him down on that. But that was only one of many rulings in this case that was slanted in one side in our view.
Mr. Wolfson, the judge ruled today that moral disapproval alone is an improper basis on which to deny rights to gay men and lesbians. The evidence shows conclusively that Proposition 8 enacts without reason a private moral view that same-sex couples are inferior to opposite-sex couples.
Right.
He's essentially saying that this was about discrimination at its core.
Well, that's right, because as you were pointing out, when they were given a chance to come into the court with any witness, any evidence, any authorities, any expertise, they had nothing. There was absolutely no reason to justify this exclusion, and so the only thing left, therefore, is people's prejudice or discomfort or fear or anxiety, all of which was stoked by a $40 million campaign to railroad this through. And what the judge said is, in America, there are certain basic freedoms and basic rights that belong to each one of us that don't get put up to a vote. That's why we have a Constitution.
Both sides of this debate spend an awful lot of money on this. Ms. Gallagher, the argument that you made about a majority of Americans opposing same-sex marriage, that is certainly true according to polls, but the critics point out saying, look, the majority of Americans were also opposed to interracial marriage. 94%, I think, were opposed back in 1958. 73% were opposed in 1968. Do you think the Supreme Court was wrong to go against public opinion back then?
I think that the 14th Amendment protects against racial discrimination. I do not think it requires Americans to recognize something that is not true.
But that's not my question. My question is, was it wrong for the Supreme Court to go against public opinion? You're saying it's wrong in this case for a court to go against public opinion.
I think the comparison you just made, and just to give me 1/4 of the time Evan just got on the two lawyers, is that the idea that Americans are like racists for believing marriage is the union of husband and wife is absurd and outrageous. It's a slur against the goodwill of the American people. It's wrong. It's not in our Constitution, and this will not be overturned. It's not just the majority of Californians or the majority of the American people. It is the majority of courts, including, most recently, the EU Court of Human Rights, that have rejected the idea that this is a fundamental human right. It is not discrimination to treat different things differently. Marriage is a union of husband and wife because these are the unions that make new life and connect children in love to their mother and father.
I just want to give you the opportunity to actually answer.
It is not bigotry. It is not discrimination. Thank you. And what do you want to ask me?
Well, I just want to give you the opportunity once again to answer. You're saying that a judge can overturn the will of the people.
When it is actually rooted in our Constitution, yes.
Okay.
Like the ban on racial discrimination in the 14th Amendment.
Okay, that's all I was asking.
But this is a big stretch to imagine that our founding fathers were banning gay marriage and passing our Constitution.
Well, Mr. Wilson,
I think many people will recognize that.
She raises a point which a lot of people will raise, is why should one judge be able to overturn the will of the people?
Well, it's not just one judge. It's the whole system of courts and an independent judiciary. It's the whole idea of a constitution. In America, we have two great political principles. One is that kings don't rule, the majority rules in ordinary things. But the other equally important American principle is that there are certain things that don't get put up for a vote. You don't put my freedom of speech, my freedom of religion, my freedom to marry up to somebody else's dictate, because that belongs to all of us. And the courts and the Constitution exist to safeguard that protection.
Ms. Gallagher, I was talking to Eric Erickson in an earlier segment, and he says that he thinks in 20 years is going to be a non-issue, that the tide of history is moving in the direction of same-sex marriage. Do you believe that is true? I mean, obviously it's a fear, it's a concern, but you don't...
I actually don't believe the future belongs to same-sex marriage. I think civilizations that lose the idea as basic as to make a marriage you need a husband and wife, or try to put in their founding documents the idea that children need a mom and dad is now bigotry, are going to be in trouble, and I want to protect America from that trouble down the road.
Well, actually, the proof that the National Organization for Marriage and the millions of dollars they funnel into these campaigns don't believe that they have the best arguments. And the reason that we know that they do fear that public opinion is moving in the direction of fairness is that they're trying to cement these discriminatory barriers into constitutions to prevent legislatures, to prevent the people from making a decision to end this discrimination this year, next year, or in the future. They're trying
Evan,
to
you're
tie the
entitled
hands
to your
of the
view, but you're not
branches.
entitled to make up my views. That isn't my view. Thank you.
Ms. Gallagher, I appreciate your time, Mr. Wilson, as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
She's trying to do the same thing, trying to talk over everyone else.
I think she got fed up because she was trying to talk and he kept kind of. He was kind of. Why don't you stand up, man? Okay, thoughts or reactions?
That was the biggest argument I've heard in my life.
Anybody, any comments? Kenny? Why don't you stand up? Megan?
I think it's interesting the words that you
Shh.
like the fairness when you said that at the beginning, like
Yeah.
fairness to marriage or whatever. But
Yeah. I think you heard a lot of language in there. Again, you see, look, last class they asked, why don't we hear this earlier in school? Why don't we talk about these things? Because these are the things that people are curious in. And I was talking to them about the fact, look, it's taken us basically 4.5 hours at the end of this class that we've spent looking at this issue of homosexuality, homosexual marriage, acts, attraction. There's philosophy involved, there's science involved, there's all these things involved, and yet I think what you see a lot of times from the other side is more of not so much those kinds of discussions about philosophy, about the science, about anything. It's more of like fighting over the words, what the words mean. And so you have like fairness, public opinion, undermine the courts, conservative nature, marriage discrimination, right-wing fear-mongering, fundamental right to marry. We're going to get to all these, but a lot of these are made up or are at least just being used to try and get people to think something differently. It's a battle over words more than anything else. The point is you cannot put on Twitter, like we said, the church's teaching on homosexuality. Okay, it takes 4.5 hours of pretty intense, consistently looking and hashing these things out. to even kind of, yes.
Why do they always choose the dumb people to like go on shows?
Who was dumb? Which
Like,
one?
I mean, they just don't have strong people
Yeah, like
for like if
I
the
think
church
the Evan
is
guy was-
representing like.
But that wasn't the church. That wasn't
I
the
know,
church.
But, like, it seems like the church's view of
Yeah.
something, they're like, if they're on one side of an argument, the person representing that entire argument
Yeah.
is always ridiculous.
So you found the woman to be dumb, or both to be dumb, or the man?
The man seemed more intelligent,
Okay.
and she seemed more angry.
yeah, I was
I
about to say
think
she
that
seemed more.
I think he seemed more intelligent because he was talking
He
longer.
was calm.
And he started off, she didn't get to like say what she needed to say, so she was like ranting off and she was upset.
And again, I think that's the whole thing, is that it sounds good. It sounds very easy coming out, what he was saying, these words, because we don't listen to the words. But when you look at the words, fairness, justice, all these types of things, when we look deeper, I think we need to go there. I think you can't just say, oh, well, that he seems nicer, or that person. Oftentimes, that's what wins. It's called a cult of personality. Okay, and we are swayed more often in our society today by the way a person talks, the way a person sounds, if they smile, if they're attractive. My favorite comedian, Jim Gaffigan, always says, "Can we just admit life's easier for attractive people?" Like if somebody who's attractive looks at you and they're like, "Oh, that's nice," but if it's a weird person, then you're like, "What's that creep want?" That's what he said. You know, I think it's true that we look at, oh, he said fairness, so he cares, I like fairness. He said justice, I like justice, he seems nice, he seems calm. Or she seems angry. Maybe, I think part of the anger that she has in there, though, again, it gets to the fact that she's like getting beat up. I mean, it's pretty clear, at least early on in the interview, who the host is for. Dimmitt, and then Megan.
I don't think it helped the woman, because her first statement, she she started calling, she used harsh language, calling names.
What'd she say? I really don't remember.
But it was constantly like, bigotry. There were, harsh words or whatever. And then.
But I think her harsh words typically were about what people refer to. I don't know.
I remember because it was her first statement. She said something. It's like, probably shouldn't. And then he came back, with right-wing fear mongering, things like that. So
Okay.
they kind of traded barbs that way.
Okay.
What hurt the woman was that, she never really got time to, compose herself again, because she kept on getting interrupted by Anderson Cooper.
Yeah.
So she didn't really, because I feel like if she would have got a longer time to talk, she could have recollected herself and, kind of could have started from there. But it was kind of 2-on-1, obviously. So,
Yeah.
but as Sam and I, we were talking, if it was on Fox, it'd be the
I
other
would not
way.
have hired her.
She was
Hudson, Megan.
How they were saying, like, in the past, like, slavery, interracial marriage, women's right to vote has always been an issue that people have been, like, fighting about, but now it's resolved in a way.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is going to happen with this issue in, like, 20 to 30 years?
Yeah. So we'll get to the interracial marriage, because that's a key component. What was the point about interracial marriage? Let's make sure we understand that. What was the point that the guy was trying to make about interracial marriage? Sam?
He was basically saying that the government's not always right.
That the government's not always right. What was going on in the past, even maybe in the 1970s or so, with interracial marriage? It wasn't allowed, or certain laws. The laws change over time, right? So the comparison that camp, the homosexual marriage camp is making is, at one point we used to say black and white people cannot marry. We kept them from marriage. Now we're keeping people of the same sex from marriage. It's the same thing. Okay? I think it's different. We're going to get to that, but so anyway, let's put on our work boots. Let's go through some stuff here. Okay, again, this is the last slide of last class. Okay? The goal of society or the government is to preserve humanity, to preserve itself Marriage is an institution that even governments have seen the benefit of since the beginning of government. Okay? Argument number 2, what is sex? Organs make sense. There is a natural process biologically. That is an argument, obviously, I think more so that the church puts forward, but even, I guess, the state could probably say, look, there's a certain biology that has been given to us by nature that just seems to work, and a lot of other things that don't work, and so we're going to honor the biological process that has been put in place there. The third argument, it quickly becomes illegal to say anything opposing it when the law begins to recognize something. It very quickly becomes illegal. So it's not, if you would say, for example, if you redefine marriage as between anybody that wants to get married, then it quickly becomes hate speech, discrimination to say anything contradictory to that. In Canada already, I know of a couple instances where priests were being at least brought up on charges of hate speech for talking about what the church says about homosexuality. Does that make sense? So just standing at the pulpit and saying this is what the church believes about homosexuality has been termed hate speech in certain places, and that will only continue, I think, if it becomes a thing that spreads.
But
Yeah.
wouldn't that just have to do with the particular person? Because I don't know what class we were talking about, but like...
No, see, it actually infringes on the right to religion. If I can't stand up in my Catholic church and say that this is what the church teaches about homosexuality without being arrested, that is a big problem.
It's all about how you present it. Like, okay, the difference between you and Mr. Rosso,
Yeah.
you're less offensive.
Okay.
I mean, you guys present the exact same information.
Okay.
But when you're in Bosso's class, you get irritated more often because he's... I don't know.
Okay.
It,
I understand what you're saying.
really, I don't think it has anything to do with the church. I think it has to do with the way what the church is presented.
Okay. But what I'm saying is if it becomes impossible to even do the opposite or talk about the opposite, that's a problem. I understand what you're saying. Hate speech can be a level of degree in which you're talking about that. And if you get out there and you're saying, you're with a bullhorn and you're saying certain things, but these people who are being brought up in Canada, it's already just a situation, they're simply saying this is what the church says. And really, technically, even if, yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm not a lawyer in terms of any kind of hate speech background, but I wonder if I would even be allowed. I wonder if you're allowed to stand up and say anything that you want in a church environment or not. That's a good. I'll have to check into that.
It's going to be like the church getting sued for not allowing a gay couple to join.
Right. Or if the church won't perform, eventually maybe 20 years down the road or something, 50 years down the road, it could be the case that the Catholic Church, if it doesn't perform homosexual marriages as being discriminatory and can be brought up on those all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of different possibilities that are out there that people don't really think about.
Can the U.S. do the same as far as arrest somebody on hate crime for that?
There are hate speech laws out there, yes. Now, currently, our hate speech laws do not cover the issue. I believe it's all. I didn't do due diligence on the research in terms of the laws of our country, but my understanding, and check me if I'm wrong here on this, but my understanding is that it is wrong to talk publicly about homosexuality in a derogatory way.
Well, I mean,
but maybe not. I don't know.
You have the Westboro Baptist, and
right.
The whole argument there, and the courts have sided with that. Is
yeah, you can stand up, I think, and say whatever you want to say right now. Yeah. But if it becomes, I think, if basically, so